Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, so as explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that not only you learn about the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, and the A4 might be different in different regions, so I'm going to refer to the physical dimensions, and that would be 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. I'm also using one of Procreate's default color profiles, and that is the sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1. I'm also going to be using Procreate default brushes, so they will be within inking, the studio pen, within inking, the dry ink brush, within artistic, the leatherwood brush, within airbrushing, the soft brush, the medium brush and maybe the medium hard brush, within charcoals, the burnt tree brush, within luminance, the light pen, within organic, the rainforest brush. In terms of the colors, I've already pre-selected a color palette. Each of the colors, if you go to the value section here within the app, has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. Each of these codes for the colors are listed down in the video description, so you just need to copy and paste them one at a time into this box and press enter. The color will appear in the top corner and then you can tap it into your own blank palette for yourself, or alternatively next to the codes in the video description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free to save you some time. And Patreon is also the place that you can gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of most of these tutorials and obviously support this channel. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make a huge difference, so thank you so much. If Patreon isn't your style, well, another way you can support the channel is simply give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and perhaps leave me a comment as well. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So for this week's image, we're going to rotate the canvas to the portrait orientation. I'm then going to go to the layers, the top layer, and my colors, first color on the top row, and I'm just going to drag from the color circle into the canvas and it flood fills. We're going to have some sky at the top, but we're not really going to show that as a color. We're just going to have that as light effects coming through. So we don't need to add anything other than greens at this stage. We're going to create a new layer, layer 2, and then we're going to go to the second color on the top row, and we're going to go to the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to tap on it. I'm going to put the spacing up to 45% within stroke path. Click done. I'm going to put the size of this brush at 5%, maybe about 70% opacity, and then just start to bring it across, tap it in, and we definitely want gaps to remain in this texture. Maybe at the kind of middle top area we can allow it to bunch together, condense up there. But then as we come down to about a third of the way down, we can allow this texture to kind of separate, leave more gaps, more taps in there, so it just becomes a little bit more sporadic. And then again, as it gets nearer the top, we allow it to bunch together a little bit more. A bit more of a condensed version of that nearer the top. Especially in the middle. Most of our light is going to be in that center area. Stay on the same layer and we'll go to the third color on the top row. Same brush, same settings, and we'll start in the center. And we'll start to tap this down a little bit as well. We're going to be a little bit more sparing with this color, a little bit more spaced out. I don't want to completely obliterate the first color and texture. So we'll bring it down a little bit. Find some appropriate places for it. But yeah, we're going to add more of it near the top again. And it's just very much a background texture that we're going to blur out in a few moments. So don't worry about it too much. I'm going to go to the fourth color. I'm going to leave it at the 5% size, but I'm going to turn it down maybe to about 20%. And I'll just bring some of these colors down into the lower area, but not too much. Just a little bit. And then going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur. We're going to slide that across, blur it in to about the 10% and then deselect. And it's just softened it into the background and blurred it out. I'm going to go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 3. On this new layer, I'm going to jump forwards. I'm going to go to the 8th color on the top row. And I'm going to go with the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to put it to 10% size, but pretty low at 10% opacity, strength, and then just lower down. I'm just going to do very lightly, just grazing the surface, just a hint of that color. A little bit more down at the bottom, almost like there's a hint of mist just collecting on the ground. Same layer, I'm going to go backwards to the first color again on the top row. I'm going to go to the medium hard brush this time with an airbrushing, 2% size, 100% opacity, and then I'm just going to run through this slightly lighter color, add some tree trunks. And they don't need to be particularly detailed at all, but they do need to be there, just a hint of them for the background. Maybe turn up a little bit, 3%. Just in those lower areas maybe. One or two could be a little bit thicker, can branch off. Something like this, and then with that whole layer again, we're going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, slide it across, a bit less than the 10% this time, maybe about 8%, and then deselect. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to go to the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to the 4th. I'm going to put the size to maybe 5%, the opacity maybe at 80%, and then just bringing in from this side. Going to have a patch of distant grass that we just see sloping in from this edge. We can bring it down to about the halfway. And then we could continue up this side as well, but we're probably going to obscure it on this side, so don't worry too much. Something like this. Going to go to the 5th color. Bottom section of that green, we'll just make it a little bit warmer. Doesn't need to be too much different, just a hint. We're leaving that top slice of the original green just a little bit cooler, pushes it a little bit further back. With that whole layer, perhaps we're just going to soften it a little bit, so adjustments, Gaussian blur. I don't feel I need to do too much of this, maybe about 7%. Deselect, go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 5. Again, I'm going to go in with a soft brush. I'm going to go to the 6th color on the top row, 5% size, 80% strength, and just cutting in from this edge. We're getting a bit closer. It's a bit darker, but also it's a bit warmer. As you get colors that come closer to us, you tend to have warmer colors represented. It will help differentiate the real background colours from the foreground. Just create a couple of areas coming in here. We're going to have a little stream cutting through, but we need some banks at the edge. Here and here. Back to our colours. I'm going to go for the 7th colour. I'm going to switch brush to the medium hard brush. 3% size, 100% opacity, and then just from this area, on this side anyway, I'm going to have a tree growing up. Get the main trunk in there to begin with, and then you can always turn the size of the brush down to 1%, and then you can have some smaller, finer branches coming off of it. Maybe a little bit up from that, maybe the lowest part of 2% is quite useful. We don't need to go into any major detail with it, but we'll just get it in there in the background. I'm not going to do any trees on this side for that area, maybe just another one poking through there, just from the edge. With that whole layer, I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and then blur it in again to about the 7%. Looking at it, I think I want to take it a note darker. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the hue, saturation and brightness. On the brightness slider, just put it down from the 50 to 49, and it's really only a slight bit different, but the slight differences on that slider actually make quite a big difference. Deselect. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 6, back to my colours. I'm going to use the first colour on the middle row, and I'm going to use the soft brush within airbrushing, 3% size, 80% strength, and then we're going to have an area here that is darker again. Just cuts in front of those details. Might put it up a little bit, 5%. Just circle it in. Over on this edge. And I'm going to have this area just sort of merging in, so I'm pressing lightly just to kind of blend it in with the layer that we've already got, and then again just bring it down in this area. So bring it down slightly on both sides like that. I'm then going to switch colour. I'm going to go to the second colour on the middle row. I'm going to change brush. I'm going to go to the medium hard brush. I'm going to put the brush size maybe to 4%. I'm going to have a tree trunk coming in here. Just slightly broader at the base of that tree trunk. Obviously the roots then need to find purchase in the ground. And go back over it a few times. It gets gradually thinner as it goes up, that tree trunk, as all trees tend to. And we can turn that down to maybe 3%, and maybe at the base here it splits off into another major part of the tree. Make sure that you zoomed out so it is reaching the top of the canvas. We can then turn it down maybe to 2%. Have some of the finer branches that maybe just separate off. There's no, absolute right and wrong for this tree shape. You can come up with your own shape if you want to change it slightly, that's fine. Create a shape that pleases you. And I'm going to do another tree over this side as well. So I'm going to put it back up slightly to 3% at the top end of 3. I'm going to bring another tree in here. Have it bending in to the scene. Getting a little bit broader at the base, and then I'm going to turn that brush down 2%. Again, have it going up the top of the canvas, branching off here. Doesn't need to be the neatest, most accurate kind of tree shape at all. Needs to be a bit more considered than the ones in the background, but again, we are going to blur this in. But we need to spend a little bit more care with this than the other one. And then just blend it in at the base. I'm going to take that layer, adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in again, maybe to about the 6%, and then deselect. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. A little checkerboard appears, and then when we go over it with a different colour, it will stop at the boundaries of that image. I'm going to go to the third colour on the middle row. Maybe go to the, in fact we'll stay with the medium hard brush within airbrushing. Low on that 2% size, maybe about 40% strength, opacity. We'll zoom in. And then just in this tree trunk, I'm going to create some texture, maybe a little bit of a division of those two areas of that tree trunk. And then we're just going to move along. And imagine the light is mainly going to come from that center area. So naturally enough, it would hit this side of the tree trunk more. We don't need to be overly dramatic with it. It is going to be still largely in shadow. But if we're going to add some texture, it's going to be a little bit more noticeable on that leading edge. But again, we don't need to be overly dramatic with it, really. Keep it a little bit random, just so it doesn't look too flat, really. Again on that leading edge. And we can always go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and blur it in. And it doesn't blur the edges of that tree shape, it just blurs the details in the center. So I'm putting that up to about 6% blur and deselect. Again, it just stops it being too flat. Go to my layers and create a new layer. I'm actually going to drag it underneath layer 6. So layer 7 is now underneath. I'm going to go to the first color on the middle row again. I'm going to go back in with the organic rainforest brush, 3% size and 100% opacity, and then behind the tree I'm going to start bringing in some of this texture. Now it varies up, you press lightly or you press hard, then you see you get two different versions. So I'm pressing quite hard. In fact, we could always put it up a little bit to the top end of 3%. Creating some background foliage initially. Keep it a little bit textured and random. Leave gaps. We're going to do some that cut in front of the tree, so we don't want to make it too dense, otherwise close up too much of those areas. Can have it cutting across the top a little bit, closing up some of those areas. A bit more off to the side, something like this. A bit more there maybe. I'm going to go to my layers, go to the top and create a new layer above that. I'm going to move along to the fourth color on the middle row. And just with this slightly lighter green, create some textures that cut in front a little bit. Obscure some of these branches at the top. We could also use the first color on the middle row. I'm happy to use some of the darker colors in front as well. Obscure some of those tree branches at the top. Now I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and blur it in a little bit, maybe about 4%, deselect, and then I'm going to do the same with the layer 7 that was behind. So adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in. Maybe a bit more for this layer, about 6%. Deselect. Okay, I'm going to go to the very top and create a new layer, layer 9. I'm going to tap on the little N and scroll down to the Add Blend Mode. I'm going to go to the 9th color on the top row, and I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put the size at 20% and the opacity really low at about 5%. I'm going to tap in a few times at the top, might even turn that up, 40% size. Tap that in a few times, and we're just going to bring a channel of light coming through the scene, so we can actually bring it down a little bit, 2 or 3 times. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. Again, change the blend mode, tap on the N, scroll down to the Add, and I'm going to go in with the 8th color on the top row, still with the soft brush, 3% size, maybe 100% opacity, and then we're just going to start tapping in some shapes. And it's really going to represent the fact that the light is just really dappling through. You can really see it emerging through the foliage. There's a bright source of light there in the background that we just start to see coming through. I might turn that down a little bit, 2%. Might be a big area there we can just join together. Some more shapes over here, just in between the branches, perhaps just going either side of it. Maybe even ones that are far reaching over that side. The whole area perhaps is just going to have some light, so peeking through in places. We do want a concentration in the center. I think that's the most important place for it, but it can be spread around. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and we are going to blur that in as well to about the 5% and deselect. I'm going to create another layer above that. Again, tap on the N and scroll down to the Add. This time we're going to go in with the 9th color. I'm going to go back in with a soft brush, with an airbrushing, maybe 12% size, something like that, and again lower down, 5% strength. Go over it a few times. If you want to make it warmer again, it's getting a little bit cool. And we can also bring it down, like a channel of light that's just coming down. It's going to be impacting things down here, so we definitely want to encourage the idea that it's encroaching down here as well. almost like sunbeams. Just a suggestion of that direction. But it is quite subtle. One going that way, one going that way, for example. But we definitely want it mainly in the center, but we can add it a few times, going in those directions as well. I think I'd like to go back to layer 2, create a layer above that. I'd like to go with the more vibrant green, maybe the 5th green on the bottom row, with the rainforest brush, top end of 3% size, and about 30% strength, opacity. And just back here, I think I'd just like to add a few bits of foliage that really reflect the fact there's a lot of light back there. So we perhaps just need to have a bigger impact of that light, just to really ramp up the sense of it. Maybe a 4th colour. Get a few varieties of green back there. Adjustments, Gaussian blur, and again we need to blur it in about 7%. Deselect, back up to layer 7, tap on it and put on the alpha lock, and again maybe with this same green, so we're using the 4th green on the bottom row. Still with the rainforest brush, 3% size, 30% opacity. Maybe we could just bring a bit more of that green in here, just in places. Don't need too much though. Heck, let's go for a even brighter green. Maybe go for the 5th colour. I think that softens it all together a little bit better. Back up to layer 8. I do actually think that that layer could do with being a little bit darker. So we'll go to the adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness, turn that down maybe to about 47%. We could, with that layer, just blur it in slightly more. So adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in again to about the 5% and deselect, and I'm much happy with that as well. So we've got a good sense of some of that upper area. Although it's quite blurred out, we're going to have much more focus in the foreground. So let's start thinking about some of these other details and areas. So maybe I can go back to layer 6, tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with the 3rd colour on the middle row, with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, 3% size, 30% strength. And well, we need to start building in some areas that just cut in front. Maybe interrupt the little stream. I want different layers to this. Little points at which the water drops. So little ledges like steps in the stream. Little shelves for it to drop from. One back here. One here maybe. Let's zoom out so we can see the whole thing. And then maybe one. Go and get a slight angle. Perhaps put it up slightly, 5%. We're just plotting them out to begin with. Get them in place. This one's going to be a bit broader. It's closer to us, so it makes sense that it'd be a bit thicker. Maybe extend some of that up this side. Bits where the grass are going to grow from. A little bank. Cutting in, closing down that area. But then deciding the kind of width of the stream by shutting down the edges. Might even go for the black colour, or the dark colour anyway, the 2nd colour on the middle row. So we get closer to us, we're going to see darker colours creeping in here. Maybe this whole step could be a little bit darker. Certainly near the bottom bit of it. And then over at this side too. We need the darkness and then we can build the lighter colours on top. So again, let's just blend that up, press more and more lightly as it goes further up. Allow it to blend through. Let's turn the size of that down to low on the 3%. Have some of that dark colour coming through. Now don't forget that the beam of light is actually over the top, so It's only so dark that can get, because it's underneath the glow, which is quite useful. Turn it up again, 5% size. Let's just darken up some of this whole area a little bit more. Circle it in. It's going to give some texture to work with then from that point. So we'll just shut down this channel. Maybe bring it in a little bit more here. So then you've got almost like more of a meander. Out a bit more on this edge. You've got like a twisting then. Okay, so we've started to describe some of the direction, and then I'm going to go for the fourth colour on the middle row. Soft brush still, 3% size, maybe 20% strength, and then we're going to bring some of those more vibrant greens on the top. Now just tapping it in, keeping it quite loose. The sunlight is obviously going to affect this centre area quite dramatically, so we need to bring some of that green in. Encroaching all the way down to the water. We've got a section that's sticking out here, so again, just have the light touching the top edge of it, bringing out some of that real vibrant green. Just tap it in, layer it in. Another little round shape here that just, it catches the edge. And a few more that retreat back in this direction. Move along. Let's go to the fifth colour on the middle row. A more vibrant green even. Start ramping it up a little bit. Okay, what I might do is create a new layer, layer 13. I'm going to change the blend mode, tap on the end, turn it to the add. And on this layer, I'd like to go in with the blue colour initially. So we'll go for the 8th colour on the middle row. Soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 20% strength. Maybe just at this edge, we're going to have a cooler colour to begin with. Representing the light hitting the water. Maybe we can bring it down in these sections a little bit as well. We'll deal with these in a moment. We're going to do this area to begin with, and then we're going to go for maybe the 10th colour on the middle row. Tap in some warmer colours in addition to that blue. Maybe leave this bit blue over here. Let's tap in some of these warmer tones. And then maybe we'll go for the 9th colour on the top row. Turn this down a little bit. Low on the 2% size and maybe 40% strength. And then we can really build in some stronger glimmers. Stronger impact of the sun hitting the water. Perhaps we'll turn it up a little bit again. Higher on that 2% size. It's quite blurred out still in the background, so we don't really need to go into much detail. That's bringing some of that light through. Soften it in on that back area. Bit more, almost sharpness in this second one. A few more points that are separated. That back area can just be quite merged together. Feel like we might go to the 9th colour on the bottom row. Still the same brush. 3% size, maybe a bit lower. 10% strength. Just go over that step where it was dark, make it a bit warmer. And then maybe this step needs a little bit more of that warm glow as well. Just soften it in so it's not too black. We want the darker tones here in the foreground. Okay, I'm going to come back to some of those areas. I'm really going to tackle the foreground a bit more. So we're going to go to the top layer, create a new layer, layer 14, and we're going to go to the first colour on the bottom row. going to go in with a soft brush with an airbrushing, 3% size, 30% strength. And just in this bottom area, I'm going to start bringing in some taps. I like it to be quite broken. Keep it quite random. Keeping this kind of sideways movement to some extent, but keep it quite random. Close off the bottom edge of the canvas a little bit. We could even go to something like the artistic leatherwood brush, tap on it, and put the spacing within stroke path up to 50%. Done. And I'm going to put the size up to 5% and 80% strength, and we're just bringing some of this. It really speeds up that kind of formation of texture there a little bit. We can allow it to go back. Certainly for this foreground area, I think we can just use this quite liberally. Quite useful. Take it up to the step. Going to change colour. Whoops. We'll go for the 8th colour on the bottom row, and we can bring some of this colour in as well. Again, take it all the way back to this point. Even some of the 9th colour for that matter. Maybe not as much. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the motion blur. Slide it to the side to about, pretty significantly actually, maybe to about the 30%, deselect. Might create a layer above it, and then I'm going to go in with some cooler colours. So maybe the 8th colour on the middle row, same brush. Bring in some blues that cut across the top. Maybe turn it down 3% as it goes backwards. Back up again, 5% for the near to areas. And again, adjustments, motion blur to the side, a bit less, maybe 25%, deselect. Might stay on the same layer, go for the 9th colour. We've got some lighter versions of this blue. Can encroach in here as well. Again, maybe turn it down, this time 3%. Just kind of spread it through. Have a real variety of colours coming through here. We're going to have a lot of real gleaming light through here, so we need just a contrast of different colours and textures. This is a good foundation to build from. Again, adjustments, motion blur, and it's going to blur in both of those areas now. Again to about 25% and deselect. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 16, and I'm going to go in with the first colour on the bottom row with the airbrushing medium brush, 3% size, maybe 80% strength. And I just want to create a couple of stones in here, in the stream. They're really going to stick out. I'm going to have them over at the edge too. I'm going to tap on the layer, put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go to the charcoal burnt tree brush, tap on it, increase the spacing to 50%. Done. I'm going to change colour. I'm going to go for maybe the 8th colour on the middle row. And we've got 10% size, 100% opacity. And I'm just going to build in some texture on our stones. Maybe turn it down 5%. Maybe on that top edge we can just have a bit more of that concentration of blue. On the top half. Don't mind if some of the black stays underneath. And maybe I can go for the 9th colour, that lighter blue. Again, just on that top edge, bring in some of that lighter. Like so. And I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, blur that in to about the 5% and deselect. And then I'm going to go for the 10th colour on the middle row. Airbrushing soft brush, 2% size, 30% strength. And then just on the edge of this stone, we're going to have the real warm impact of the light. Like so. I'm going to turn off the alpha lock on the layer. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in even more, about 3% and deselect. I'm going to create a new layer on top, tap on the N, scroll down to the add blend mode. And we're going to go in with the light pen within luminance. We're going to go for the 10th colour on the middle row, 40% size and maybe about 30% strength. And we've got the sense of much blurred out, but in the background the light kind of sparkling on the water. And we need to create that effect in the foreground as well. So just the top edge of some of these ripples, we're going to have little points, sparkles on the water. And we can just really disperse these around. A little bit time consuming, but it's such a nice look and effect that I don't mind devoting the time to do this. And it's a really nice contrast to the more subdued colours that we've got here as well, the browns and the blues. I'll just go along that, near that top edge of the stone. Press on harder for some brighter, more impactful points like that. And then press on more lightly as we go further back. Smaller textures perhaps. Little dashes, collections of texture. And it's a little bit time consuming, like I say, but it's worth the time put in. Maybe along the top edge of the stone we could just introduce that glow and that gleam. Same for what this one as well, just trace along the edge perhaps. And even this one a little bit. And back in the water. We could always turn the opacity down if we needed to. 20%. And then we can build it up more gradually in places too. I like pushing it a bit further, so I'm actually going to put it up further. I'm going to put it to 40%. Let's be bold. Add some big areas of impact for the sun, but then some smaller dashes and points too. Keep zooming out, checking the impact generally. Top edge of the stone a little bit there, just trace along the edge. If it's reached the stone, then it's going to reach the water as well, so take it up to the stone perhaps. Now the back part of the stone is presumably going to be in shadow, so we're not going to add any highlights there. So just be mindful where you're putting them. I want a real channel in the center. So again here, I'm going to imagine it leading up to the stone, but not going to be behind it. Smaller dashes as we come along to this area. It's important you keep it as a kind of sideways movement. Let's keep going with the brush. A light pen. Maybe some bigger points as we get closer to us. It's going to be less of a sideways dash, it's going to be more of a round blob as it comes off the canvas even. Maybe turn that opacity down. Can have some lighter ones. Vary it up. I'm going to put it to 20%. Have some just off the edge here a little bit. Again, not too much on the shadow part behind the stone. Let's put the opacity up again, 30%. You see, it just takes a few minutes and we're really starting to build up a really nice effect. This is very much the foreground kind of focus of attention. Maybe another stone, we can just go around the edge. We can add stones in just by doing the highlights. Doesn't need any more than that really, especially when it's in this center area. I mean, we could start moving up into these areas too. We're going to have a general sense of perhaps the water coming over the edge. So we'll start with those lines first. Maybe a stone that sticks up. Catches the light in a couple of places. Water coming down. Perhaps we'll change colour. We'll go for the 9th colour. We could have some blue there as well, mixed in. Tap it in. I'll zoom in a bit. Have it a bit more textured and broken. Tap it in. As it comes into the water area here. Maybe it just splashes around a little bit as well. So a bit of spray, a few taps. And a bit of churn there as it hits the water as well. Zoom out and you can see the impact of that. And this area generally, maybe just some more sideways bits of this blue texture. Merging in with the warmer colour. Bring some of the blue in from the edges. We definitely don't want all the blue to be completely subdued. It's definitely going to bounce some light around in places too. A nice blue colour, but not too much of it. And then up here as well, we can have a bit of the blue in the sections up here, but I think mainly the warmer colours are going to be noticeable in this distant area. So let's go for the 10th colour again. Again, I'm going to start creating some edges of stones in this upper section. Going all with the light pen. In fact, I might go for a warmer colour. Let's go for the 9th colour on the bottom row. Let's add some warmer colours just at the point at which it spills over. Some sideways textures, taps, dots. I'm going to go in with the 10th colour on the middle row. Still the 10% size on the light pen and 20% strength. And we want some finer textures back here. I might put it up a little bit actually. Let's put it up to 15% size. Maybe just describe the top edges of some stones that are going further back. Let's put it up again, 30% size. Maybe as we get further back here, we don't notice individual stones. We're getting more of a blurring out. We did use the soft brush for those background areas and then getting a softening out with the light pen, which is normally quite sharp, but because we're using a bigger size and a lower opacity, it's getting more blurred in its impact. And we don't really need to go and describe too much of the water. You could just do a couple of hints at it like that, but I don't want to get into the same level of detail back there at all. But I do need a couple of sharper points of light in here. So I'm going to put the opacity up 40%. We definitely need some strong glimmers here. Maybe back there as well, just make sure it reflects the same level of intensity of light. Keep zooming out, checking. So that's starting to bind it all together quite effectively, considering we have more of a depth of field where it's blurred in the background. Just a couple more points, maybe. A little bit as it spills over the top as well. Bring some of that glow down, just in places. Again, the top edge of stones is quite useful. Just a couple more in the lower area here. Okay, so we need to add some more sharpness in these areas. We've got a sharpness of the water. We've got a nice depth of field effect blurred in the distance, but then it doesn't match these areas, so we need to refine those a little bit. So I'm going to go back to layer 6. I'm going to go in with the smudge tool set to the studio pen. So we're not using the brush, we're using the smudge. 10% size, 100% opacity. I'm going to aim for these areas back here initially. And I just want to start adding texture. So I'm going to start with the lightest of greens to begin with at the top. Bring in the suggestion of more grass textures. And we can do that over at both sides. Just on the lighter green. And then we're going to push up from the darker colours in front. Bring them through. And this isn't necessarily the finished look to it, but it's a good start. It's a good way of just building in some texture to begin with. Push some of it through. Do as much of this as you think will look effective. Bring it over here and do the same. We might just do it a little bit in the background. I'm going to turn the opacity down to 50%, and then we can do it a little bit in the background there too. But it's going to be subtler, it's just going to be a suggestion here and there. I don't really want it to be in focus anyway, but it's just going to give the impression of it a little bit. 100% opacity again, and then we're going to do similar in some of these areas, a little bit lower down. Work through all the different areas. Just creating texture to begin with. Okay, I'm going to go to the very top, create a new layer on top of that, layer 18 all the way up there. I'm going to go to the greens down here, so I'm probably going to use the first color on the bottom row, which is the black to begin with. I'm going to go in again with the inking. We'll try the dry ink brush actually. We'll put it to maybe 10% size, 100% opacity. And then we can just start building in some strong blades of grass at the bank over at this side. Might turn it up a little bit, maybe 15% size. And we can build it in over here too. Nice dark colours. Maybe we'll go along to the second colour. Turn the strength of that down though, so maybe only 50% this time. Have some greens there mixed in. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with maybe the fifth colour on the bottom row. And I'm okay now just to have some of these blades of grass highlighted, and I'm using the same brush and I'm just skimming over some of the grass we've already created in a similar kind of movement. It's not going to add it anywhere that the grass isn't already, but try to mimic some of the shapes that you've already got, and it'll just highlight some of them as perhaps they're catching the light. Just like everything else is subject to the light conditions, these should be too. Bring some of that through. And then we can go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, blur it in slightly, maybe 3% and deselect. Okay, back on layer 6, I'm going to create a layer above that. I'm going to go in with the fifth colour on the bottom row, and I'm going to go to the rainforest brush. Again, the spacing is at 45% within stroke path. I'm going to put it at 3% size, maybe 20% strength, and I'm just going to start building in some textures that are just back here a little bit. We definitely need more of that light and also a bit of texture just creeping in. We don't want it to be too sharply in focus, but just the suggestion that there's more texture back there, I think, does no harm. It can sort of interplay with some of the other grass textures that we've already got. It's not going to be too destructive, especially as it comes towards the center areas. Maybe go for a slightly darker green, maybe the second colour on the bottom row, just in places too, and even maybe the first colour on the middle row. Blend in these trees with the ground a little bit. Back to the fifth colour, even more of the light coming in here. What are we on? We're on 20% opacity. Let's put it up a little bit, 30%. Just need to ramp up the light in places. Let's really sell the luminosity of the scene. Especially in the center channel area. That background area looks a little bit strange. We're going to work on that. Got it there. So maybe if it just that layer, layer 4, transform, just move it down a little bit, just a bit too much of it. Deselect. Perhaps on that layer 4 we could go in with some different textures, so we can go for maybe the second colour on the top row, go in with maybe the airbrushing soft brush, 3% size, 20% strength, and just back there we can add some extra textures, I suppose. Maybe even a bit of a top highlight across the top there. Might just go back to layer 5, tap on it and put on the alpha lock, soft brush with an airbrushing, third color on the middle row, 4% size, 20% strength. I'm just going to darken these tree trunks just a little bit. They're a bit too vibrant, a bit too brown. They need to be just a little bit desaturated and a bit darker. I think that helps. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Do hit the subscribe for more of this kind of content. Give me a thumbs up and maybe a suggestion in the comments, the kind of thing that you'd want to see from me in the future. Thanks as ever. Bye for now.